Hello and welcome again to the next part of this session talking about the ArcSight ESM usability console user guide, whatever we want to call it. In this particular case, we're focusing on the console, and we're now up to the part where we're going to talk about dashboards. So far, quick recap. We've talked about the various panels, what they do. We've looked into active channels, which is what's going here, so we can see some data here. We've talked a little bit more about the filters and how they operate, how we can restrict the view of the data here, and how we can use some of that data to do some very simple investigations. Now, that's all well and good and useful, but what we really need to be able to do is display that into dashboards. I need to dig into what is a dashboard, what does it display, what are the things that we can use it for, and what are the elements that we can use as well. So this is actually quite a sophisticated and long section. I'm going to take it relatively simple and straightforward, and I'll dig in details a little bit later with regards to some of the more advanced functions. So we talked about active channels, and we can just simply view the data, and if we wanted to, we could just select some data and put that into an event graph and so on. I'm not going to do that here, but what we could do is we can actually have a dashboard. A dashboard is a visual representation of some of the data. What we often hear is, for example, well, I looked at the dashboards and they are blank. Well, let's give you an example. So if I look at this one, yeah, this is a standard dashboard that comes with the system. We can actually see this in our resource tree here. It's actually part of the foundation, part of the Express package, part of part of the VPN, for example, here. And this is just the VPN Login Overview. So it's that particular dashboard there. And yes, it's blank. The reason is a couple of things that's worth bearing in mind. And the reason for talking about it at this point, because what we're doing is we're filtering the data down to what's relevant. And of course, it's limited on the time span in question. So we can see that time span here. So we can actually say, it flashes up and says data collection start time and the last data received at. So in the time frame that's here, there is no data that corresponds to the filters that have been applied to these particular dashboard elements. Common reason for this, I'm actually not feeding through any VPN relevant data. If I look at, say, for example, my operating system login overview dashboard, which again is another standard dashboard that comes within the system under the operating system group here. If I look at this one, this is full of data because I am feeding through data that is going to hit these filters that's going to populate this data, and we can see that it's still relevant to the time frame that I'm talking about. So we can see the data has been refreshed at a particular time frame, and you can see that it's been refreshed into those particular components there. Just for reference, you can actually disable and enable those particular data objects there. You can do that on all of these, so we can see enable and disable on all of them. We can change the format of what the dashboard objects are, and we can also edit those as well, which is what I'm going to dig into in a bit more detail of what the various components are that are used as part of this. Now, let me just expand this dashboard so we've got a full view on what is it that I'm viewing and what are the various components that I'm seeing as part of this dashboard. Now, this dashboard consists of 5 elements. It's fairly obvious to see. We've got 3 charts and 2 tables. Now we can shift and we can move and we can allocate these anywhere. Now, just for reference, we can do that by just literally clicking and dragging. So if I was to take this failed logins, I'd click, I'd drag, and as you can see, it moves around the various parts of what's relevant that I can move it to. So if I was just to drop it there, it would appear, and I'm shuffling things around accordingly. We don't have that many options for displaying some of this data and splitting it in the particular view, but for example, do play around with some of the options. For example, I can just click and move some of this, and actually what I can do is just put it back to where it was and display that data. What we also have is we can change some of the functions within that as well, and we can see some of the information. Now, again, as I mentioned before, a dashboard is just literally a representation of the data that's been fed into it, that's been filtered as it goes through. So if I look in this top 10 users with failed logins, so in my particular sample environment here, I'm only actually getting 3 usernames that are actually failing logins. If I had 21, it would only display 10 because it's going to filter that. how is it doing that, and what are we doing? Well, what we can do is we can have different types of dashboard object that make up this total dashboard. So if I go, in fact, there was another one's been added. If I actually look at this one, I go to this particular view, I can edit it here. I can also edit it within the dashboard itself, within the resources. But I'm going to edit it here because it refers to as what it refers to there is a data monitor. So as we edit it, it opens up the inspect edit panel as we'd expect, because we're changing a resource, so it's on the right hand panel pane here. So we can see this particular, what we call data monitor. A data monitor is an object that we can have within the ESM system itself that allows it to collect data against a filter and to do some additional processing as a summary of that information, for example. So in this case, we're doing top 10 users with failed logins. We can restrict that because we want to restrict a particular set of data that's relevant. So we're only looking for failed operating system logins. So if I click on that and then do the little drop down, you can see that it actually gives me the filter and so on. Again, with a recording size and limited amount of space I have, you can't see everything there, but you can see that it's a filter that's been defined. Again, I go back to my point before. One of the reasons for talking about filters as being so important to do with active channels and everything else is it does reflect in everything else. We want to filter those particular views, this particular data monitor, down to just the events of interest that we want to feed through. So in this case, we're only looking for operating system logins with failed logins. So that's what that particular filter is. In fact, actually, I can go to the particular section and show you that, but I'm not going to here. This is a data monitor that we can define. Now, I'm just going to pick on this one because it's a nice little chart. It's what's called a top value count. So what does that mean? Well, it means it's a top. That's the same as if we were to do a top within a search, for example, within Logger. So we're doing a top 10. So we can define how many are there. So we can do a top value count. So number of entries, 10. Top 10. That's what that is. With failed logins, we're restricting that by filter. And what are the other information here? I'm not going to go into too much detail because it's actually documented in the manuals and it's documented in the help as well. But I just want to give you a quick understanding of how this works. Like I said, a data monitor is an object where you put data into and it carries out a calculation. So in this case, we're looking at this. So we define what we call buckets, and it fills those buckets up with data, and then it does a summary on that data. So in this case, we're creating 12 buckets of 300 seconds each, allowing us up to having a maximum of 1,000 separate entities in there. If there's 1,001, it's just going to ignore the last one. It's just going to do a summary. So number of entries, top 10, that go into this based on the filter. It's going to summarize those and give me the data. Then if I wanted to, I can have a local variable. I'll come back to that another time. And if I wanted to even do a drill down, I can actually set a particular drill down option for it. I'll actually show you that in use in a second, the default drill down that's available. What do I actually get as a result of that? If I just remove that panel, let's just make that simpler. We can see that. We can undock it so we can look at it in a bit more detail. All that data monitor is going to do, it's going to filter the data. It's going to do this in real time. It's then going to sum the top 10. So in this case, we're now up to 5. It's going to sum those across a time period. That was that 300 seconds in 12 separate buckets to make sure that we got the time frame of a time period, and it's going to fill that data up. It is not doing a search and then displaying the results of that search. This is a fundamental difference in the way that other systems operate here. What it's doing is it's filling these buckets of data, filling these time intervals. Remember the time intervals defined here. It's filling those time intervals with the relevant sum data, not the full data. And that's critical because we just want to display, in this case, failed logons. So if I just pop that back into the dock there, what I could do, of course, is as I drill down, I'm interested in John P, for example, I could just double click. And what it will do is it will then open an active channel based on that data. It's going to pass the time period from the data monitor. That's the time period that the data monitor is running for. Again, if you work it out backwards, 300 seconds for 12 buckets and so on, that's the time period. It's going to then restrict it by the username. that's hitting the filters that were defined. It's as simple as that, and those are my failed passwords, the actual log entries. But that's the critical thing. If I jump back to this dashboard a second, this is the sum data, not the actual log data. As I double click to drill down, it's then passing that information that's been summed here, aggregated into this particular buckets, and it's then running the search there in the active channel. So there is it's a bit of a fundamental thing. It's a bit of a thing to try and understand what it's actually doing and why it's doing things a particular way. But it is worthwhile trying to understand that, because it then starts to understand how we do the rest of these data monitors and how they build out to be in a larger dashboard. But just remember, we're building these data monitors up to give this dashboard view. So why don't we create a new dashboard? So I'm going to go back to my resource view. I don't actually have any of my own little dashboards there, so let's right mouse click, new dashboard. So we get a blank dashboard. Oh, okay. Well, what do we do next? Well, as you notice, it actually flagged up the data monitor that I want to use. I could actually create my own data monitors here, but I'm actually just going to use some standard data monitors that come within the system itself, just to see some of the information. That we get everything under solutions, we get into the foundational stuff, so we can see some information in there. We can see some cross-device information, configuration changes, and so on. We can see firewall data, the last firewall configuration changes, and connection overviews, and so on. I'm actually just interested. These are just the standard data monitors that we provide, and I'm interested in the top 10 denied outbound connections by the host. So again, if I just double click on that, it opens up the edit. So again, I go back to what we were looking at before. Top value counts, remember, that's what we're doing before. So we're doing top 10,000 separate individual entries if we want it. We're doing 30 seconds of 12 buckets, and we're aggregating on where it's come from, the zone. We're aggregating on the address because it's outbound, so we're going to make it on the same address with the same host name. And then it's just going to put that into a particular data monitor. That's all it is there. All I need to do, I drag and I drop. All I need to do is just right mouse click, add to, and it gives me the option of which kind of view I want to do. So in this case, I want to do it as a bar chart. It then adds it as a bar chart, and it's going to then populate the data, and hey presto, hopefully in a second render me some data, and there we go. The important thing is again, you'll notice here, just like it was, and I mentioned earlier with the other things where it actually showed with the resources and the firewalls, it showed them in red and so on. In this particular case, it's showing these in red because these are enabled. I can disable as accordingly. So all these default ones are actually available as standard. In fact, that's actually not giving me anything. So let me put in another one just to show. I want to do top 10 users with failed logins. It's the one we were looking at a second ago. I'm going to add that, and this time I'm going to add it as pie chart. And it adds it, and there we go. I can have lots of these dashboards. I can build these up. And in fact, what I probably want to do is I want to do intrusion monitoring. I'll do reconnaissance because I know I'm getting reconnaissance in progress. Last 10 hosts scanned. Add to dashboard. Now, not all data monitors are available as different types, and I'll actually create a couple in a second. So do that as a table, and hopefully it'll populate that data in a second. So there we go, that's the last set of hosts that have been scanned that we've been identifying as well. So we can just create all that, and if I wanted to put that over there, then I just drag and drop and so on. It's nice and simple. Once I'm finished, remember it's actually saying untitled. So when I'm ready, just go over the name of it, right mouse click. I want to save dashboard as, and give it a name. In this case, I'm going to do my first dashboard. Press OK. And I go to dashboards, and there's my first dashboard. I want to go to data monitors. Now, what do I want to do here? I want to show some of the options that we have available. I'm not going to go into the detailed options and some of the statistical things we can do here, but I want to illustrate a few options here. So I'm going to do a new data monitor. Brings up a new panel here, and now we can go through the process of defining this new data monitor. So I can look at the data monitor type. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Now what we were looking at was top value count, what we call bucketize. That's these ones we were doing. They're just doing top 10. That's all. Very simple. What we could also do is we can look at system monitor ones. Remember we looked at the dashboards earlier to do a systems administration. That's what the system monitor ones are here. So we can build our own specific ones focused around system events. We can look at statistics. We can do session reconciliation to ensure that we got the same user or the same IP address that's used across, say, a VPN session. We can look at partial rule match. That's a specific one to do with the systems monitoring. We can look at moving average, last number of events, geographic map, event graph, and so on. So we've got lots of different ways of doing things. I'm going to pick on, for example, just this particular one, moving average, just to illustrate. I'm not going to create it because I'll touch on this in a much more detailed manner in a minute, but I'm going to do this as moving average. So it initializes it. So we give it a name, my first moving average. By default, they are not enabled, so I want to enable it. I also want to restrict this by the number of events, by the actual events I want to view. So in this example, I'm going to look for a particular type of events. Let me get the right ones. So again, I'm just going to restrict that just on the failed logins again. I just want to make sure I got the right ones there. So failed operating system login events. So it's just a simple filter. Again, I could alter that filter. I could create my own filter and add it. I can create my own fill set if I want to, but I want to make this over availability. It says there's a number of seconds that the data should make new data available. So it's going to refresh it at a frequent interval of 30 seconds. What field do I want to use for the value, for the stats field? Value calculation. What do I want to do? I want to do sum of values. Actually, no, hang on a second. What field do I want to set as a stats value? So what do I want to calculate from a statistics point of view? What is a moving average? And what I do want to do I want to do this over where is it? I'll just do the aggregated event count. We could do multiples at that point. What calculation are we going to use? We're going to use sum of values, you have average value, number per minute, value by second. Well, let's just do summary. We're going to group it by priorities. We're going to sort it by field values, which allows us to sort the display. And importantly, I'm going to mention, I'm not going to activate this or anything. I'm just going to talk about this as a generic, and we'll give in and do a much more detailed example of this later. But we can also trigger an alarm change. Now, one of the reasons for me mentioning before about there's these three different types of events. There's the base event, which is the original that comes from a log source. There's the correlated event, which is a trigger of a rule, for example. And then there's also the system event. Now, what we can also do with this moving average is we can actually trigger a change, and it's whether the moving average goes up or down. So when it breaks a particular value threshold, in this case the standard is 50%. So event volumes, for example, will go up and down over the period of day. Now that's absolutely fine because it's a relatively steady curve. It'll go up and then a steady curve that comes down. If something suddenly peaks up or peaks down, then it will change its moving average by a particular percentage. Now, could you calculate that? Possibly. This is more likely to be something you put in place and tune over time to fit your particular requirements. But typically 50% moving average is pretty good. So that what that means is it will generate a system event to indicate that a moving average has gone up or has gone down against this particular data monitor. This effectively becomes a rule. It is creating an event should there be a statistical situation where the number of failed logins goes excessively high or excessively low. You want to know both situations. We can then have a rule that picks up that particular event as it's occurred and then trigger an alert or something else accordingly. So you can see how things are starting to tie together with regards to filters, with regards to data monitors, with regards to dashboards and active channels. And the final things are just to do with the number of samples and how we're going to group them and so on and so forth. But I just wanted to give that as an illustration of how you would go about doing some of these data monitors, how they are not just a search that's displayed in a view, they actually do something behind this, which in this case, it's actually creating a trigger aspect to do statistical analysis of what's going on. In fact, I know this won't actually work because I don't have the relevant data, but I could add this as a statistics chart to this. It won't populate because remember, it populates over time. It needs to add the data into the system and build it over time. So that will currently remain blank for a period of time until I can actually add that, add some data in, and that'll take time. So it's going to take, number of samples 12, availability of 30 seconds, and so on. It's going to take time for that statistics to build. But as you can see, it then becomes easy for me to create baselines that are visually displayed that trigger actions behind this as well. So a dashboard is not just a display. Now, I know I've covered a lot there. There's a huge amount that we can do with dashboards. I've given a very simple example where we can just put some standard dashboard data monitors into a dashboard, save that, manipulate it, move them around, that kind of thing. And then when we're happy, we can then just save the overall view of our dashboard and change it. In this particular example, I'm going to save my dashboard and update it with the various panels in there. But that's a very quick run through of some of the scenarios we can do with dashboards and some of the data monitors that we can use within those dashboards as well. I'll be touching on the actual aspects of how we can do some of the advanced things later, but that's a very quick run through for the moment. Thank you very much.